Okay, this is I guess, the aftermath of Chapter 11 test. So we're going to look at the questions and we're going to try and figure out where some of the mistakes actually came from. So the first part was just about circles, 8 points, and it was split into 2 questions here. This is actually from the January 2007 test. So the line joining the points is the diameter of a circle. Find an equation for C in standard form. So part of this is also actually figuring out, sometimes it's better to actually draw like a picture for these questions. So it doesn't have to be particularly accurate. Certainly we need to know that diameter is all the way across the circle. And then we have our 2 points here and here. I know this is probably not very accurate, but that's not too important at this stage. So when we're trying to find the equation for this, what we need to know is we need to know the center of the circle, which clearly they haven't given us. And we also need to know the radius of the circle as well. So as this question's asked for the diameter, if we can work out the length of the diameter, obviously we can half it and that will tell us what the radius is. So first of all, then, to find the center of the circle, as we know 2 points on opposite side of the circle, that means we're going to use the midpoint formula. So there's the midpoint. So we've got 1 for actually using the correct method, using the midpoint formula, and then 1 point for actually finding out what the answer is to that. To find that length, we're going to use the distance formula. So the reason this is all divided by 2, of course, is remember, this is the whole length, and we're only trying to find a radius. So just actually 1 point for that at this point. And then once we have those, it's knowing what we do with each of those numbers. So it's doing the opposite for the center. So instead of 1, it's x minus 1 squared. Instead of 5, it would be y minus 5 squared. And the distance, it turned out to be, was actually square root of 5. And as we're actually trying to find out r squared, then it would just equal 5. And that's where the 6 points came from for this first question. Now, for the second part, find the slope of the tangent. It's only 2 points. A lot of you make this question way too difficult, as in you actually differentiated this implicitly. Now, that will get you the answer, but if you can avoid doing that, particularly for circles, you don't really want to do that at all. So as it says, find the slope of the tangent, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find basically this. But notice this is just at 90 degrees to what this diameter is. So if we work out the slope of the diameter, then I can just do the negative reciprocal as it's perpendicular, and that will give me my answer. So with this being kind of trivial, as in you don't really need to show many steps for this one, the slope between 2 points is just an algebra 1, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You would find that it's 1/2, and then when you do the negative reciprocal, you get -2. So that's one where a lot of people perhaps spent way too long getting the answer. But that's one of those questions where if you can leave it, you can always come back if you have time on the exam. You can get the correct answer, but it just took you a lot longer than perhaps the 2 minutes than you'd be allowed for that question. We didn't specifically have circles on the test review questions because that wasn't actually included within that unit specifically. It's something they assume that you've already covered. So we covered it within our very first lesson. So lesson 11.1 would be the one to go back if you want to look at that for additional help. Second question. So now we're on to 11.2. We're on to implicit differentiation. And the first question, find the equation of the tangent to the curve x equals cosine 2y plus pi at 0, pi over 4, for 5 points. The first thing to point out is, notice this is really similar to the question that was actually on the test review as well. So we did do one very similar to that the lesson before. So you can always go back and watch the video for that one too. So with it starting off as x equals, I know normally we like them to be y equals, but if we do that, we're going to have to do inverse cosine of x. And when we differentiate, we haven't done differentials of inverse cosine. So we're kind of stuck on this one. So instead of differentiating for y, we're actually going to differentiate for x for this one. So the differential for x would be dx by dy. Differential for cosine is negative sine. And then you also have to differentiate what's inside the parentheses as well. So the differential for 2y would just be 2. We don't need a dy dx for this one because remember we're differentiating for x here. This is why we put dx by dy. So we would just bring the 2 to the front. Pi is obviously just a number, so the differential that would be 0. And then once we've got a trig ratio here, just make sure it's of the same thing, as in 2y plus pi for both. So 2 points for that part. Kind of an easy point for the next one. We don't really want dx by dy though. We actually want dy by dx. So we're just going to do the reciprocal of both sides for this one. There is the negative still there. I would probably put -1 over 2, but that's certainly an acceptable way of writing that answer. Now, I guess we should really look at what the question's asking. It says find the equation of the tangent to the curve, and that's kind of why we differentiated, because we need to know the slope and we need to know a point. Notice they've given us a point, so we're just really trying to find the slope, and then we can piece that together. Kind of unfortunate, a lot of people drop points on this stage. If you know that this is the slope, you do know what y is, so you can actually substitute in for y, which is pi over 4. So if you do that, you would get 1/2. And then I broke this one up. This was actually a 6-point question in reality. It says give your answer in point slope formula. So you have to know what that actually means for this one. So that means it's going to be y equals. Oh, actually, I apologize. Give your answer in point slope form. I actually accepted either of these answers. So if you got to this stage, I certainly was okay with that. And if you got to this part, you were okay with this as well. So I changed the question just a little bit. They gave the extra point for actually going into slope intercept form. I just decreased that by, I didn't think it was worth 2 points when most of the focus is on implicit differentiation. The last question, this is the big one. This is the 10-pointer. So find dy by dx in terms of x and y. And you can see here we've got single terms, and we have a product rule here. And the one on the test was actually more complicated than this. Our product rule actually was y e to the negative 2x. So I picked the worst case scenario for when we did the test, but normally you don't get them as complicated as that. And sometimes, like on the test review, there's actually no product rule at all. These only have one single letter. So it just depends. Sometimes they can do them with just single letters. Sometimes they can do product rules, and sometimes they can do complicated product rules. So this is probably the middle variety of question, and probably the most likely one. So notice even it says differentiating to obtain. You don't even have to have specifically the correct answer here for some of these questions as well. As long as you have something close to this, then they're going to actually allow this. So how we're supposed to do this is bring the 3 to the front and multiply. So 48, decrease the power by 1. And as it's a y, we would put dy by dx. So we can actually get to 2 points just for actually getting this first term correct. Oh, I'm sorry, we do need the negative 54 at the end here. So the differential on negative 54x is negative 54. Now for the middle part though, this is the product rule. So you'd have to set this part equal to u and this part equal to v. I saw some people factored out the 9 and then just did u as x squared and v as y. You can definitely do that. I normally would just leave the u as part of this 9x squared, because then you've got to distribute back later anyway. So you factor and then you've got to distribute again later. So sometimes it's easier just to leave it as 9x squared and then y. So 9x squared times the differential of y, which is dy by dx, plus the second one, which is y, times by the differential of the first term, which would be 18x. So we're getting 1 point here just for doing our product rule as well. Now we're trying to find dy by dx. So we take out the terms that have dy by dx as a common factor. So as in this one and this one. And our other two terms, we can just bring those to the other side. So negative 54 becomes positive 54. 18xy becomes negative 18xy. And then we can divide by this term here. If you got to this, this was fine. But notice you could also divide each term by 3. Now, that part in general was done pretty well. Unfortunately, some slight slips really cost you, though, when you get to the second question, because it's going to make this one very difficult to answer. Now, this specifically wasn't on the test review, but we'd actually talked about it at the start of the lesson because it was actually on the previous homework. And we actually talked about it 2, possibly even 3 times within that lesson. So this is certainly one that did come up as well. So find the x coordinates of the point. Now, the original question didn't actually say that. It actually said find the whole coordinates. And the question was actually worth 7 points. There was actually 2 points at the end for finding out the other values as well. I didn't want to make this question too long because I knew people who didn't get X wouldn't be able to find Y either. So I shortened this question just a little bit. So what we're trying to do then is, if we're trying to find when the slope is 0, the important part is that means that the numerator is 0. And one of the questions that we had was, when is it parallel to the y-axis, and when is it parallel to the x-axis? So for parallel to the x-axis, that would be horizontal. That would be this question, when is the slope 0? And the other one, parallel to the y-axis, that's vertical. And that's actually when the denominator is 0. So you'd actually set this one equal to 0. So we get to here, we set it equal to 0. And then you try and solve for one of the variables. So as this one has 2 variables, I would probably bring this to the other side and make it positive. So 18 equals 6xy. And then solve for one of the variables. And you got points for either solving for x, or you got a point for solving for y at this stage. Now, ideally, you want to solve for y in this question because it says find the x coordinates. So basically, I want everything in terms of x. So it makes sense that I want to substitute in x for this question. And then this is where people did get stuck and kind of lost points. For this one, you had to know then, where am I substituting this? And that's where some people stopped. The original question. That's what you're actually looking for, okay? Because it talks about the equation of the points on C, and it tells you at the top the equation C is this equation here. So we substitute in. As I was grading this, I actually gave 1 point for knowing it's equal to 0. And it says 1 point for the substitute part. I actually gave 1 point if you actually got to this part here instead. So I've kind of broke it up slightly differently. And then when you're plugging into here, you've got some sort of equation. Now, the one that you should have had ideally was this one here. Some people got very careless on the distribution here as well, like 3 cubed, and they were putting 9, or they wouldn't even distribute, and they just did 16 times 3 is 48. So you got to make sure you multiply this out correctly. And once you do that, you ended up with this equation down here. And then when you combine terms, you just get x to the 4 is 16. And unfortunately, some people just put 2 again. Don't forget the negative root as well would also be valid for this question as well. I actually changed the points for this one. I didn't give 2 points for the answer. I gave 1 point for the answer. I gave 1 point for getting to this sort of equation as well. So I kind of split this up slightly differently to how they did this on here to try and make this a little bit easier for you guys as well. All right, that's the answers to the test. For those of you who need to retest, there is a remediation posted, and the retest will be on not the first Monday back because that's the teacher workday. It'll be on the second one. Let me see if I can just click on my calendar here. It'll be on April 12th, 2021 for people who are retaking in that year. All right, that's it.